New polo t-shirt, trying to grow a mustache, new Seiko. I'm just vibing. One of the things that I love more than building computers is building budget computers. Why should gaming have to be expensive and, cost several $1,000s with new fancy, overclockable processors and graphics cards with, lots of VRAM and AI stuff? Nah, it's boring. It's overdone. I like doing stuff that's creative. And that got me into a little project that we're going to be doing today. This is technically going to be a two-part project. The other part, I'm actually pretty excited about. It's gonna be fun. So, that brings us to the topic of today's video. Say hello to this guy. This guy you did not know existed, probably, or you forgot about. This is the i5-10400F. A very not well-known CPU, actually, but back in its day, this was a budget monster. I figured let's do a little bit of a history lesson and then kind of what the subject of today's video is. So, the i5-10400F was originally released in May of 2020 as part of Intel's new Comet Lake. Now, the reason why I say you probably forgot about this CPU is that Comet Lake, the architecture was not very well known at the time. So to give you an idea of the landscape that Intel was entering in when they released this thing, this is May of 2020. At the time, the current environment was made up of Intel's 9000th gen, which was a Coffee Lake refresh, and then AMD had, in July of the previous year, released Ryzen 3000. Ryzen 3000, of course, included classics like the Ryzen 5 3600X and the Ryzen 3900X, two very well-known popular gaming CPUs that lasted quite a long time. Ryzen 3000 brought with it the Zen 2 architecture, and that allowed AMD to essentially trade blow for blow with Intel in terms of gaming performance. So they were very even competitively in terms of which platform you went with. They were pretty even. Intel did have a slight edge because they had a little bit more overclocking headroom, but make no mistake, if you bought Ryzen 3000 or Intel 9000, you were pretty happy either way. Ryzen at this time was actually a very compelling option for people because not only did it offer higher core counts on the higher end, you could get 12 cores and 16 cores on the higher end with Ryzen, but it was also a lot more efficient. See, Coffee Lake with Intel was proving to be kind of troublesome because they were running into issues with heat generation. The 8700K and then the i9 9900K after it ran into a lot of problems with how much heat they were generating because Intel was pushing the clock speed as high as they possibly could. So Intel was having problems with heat. To add context with this, Intel had been stuck on the 14 nanometer manufacturing process for about 6 years, going back to Broadwell on the enterprise side and then even Skylake on the consumer side. Skylake, if you're not familiar, was the i7 6700K. At the top of the line when it was released. So Intel had essentially been using the exact same manufacturing process for their chips for 6 years. So it was really hard for them to keep pushing the same architecture farther and farther and bumping up the clock speed. They needed to revamp things. They eventually would, but for the sake of this video, that was not the case. So even back in Skylake all the way up until Comet Lake, we were still stuck on the same 14 nanometer process node. The jump from Coffee Lake from the previous generation to Comet Lake didn't really bring much. From the 9900K to the 10900K, you went from 8 cores with hyperthreading to 10 cores with hyperthreading. That's something. A little bit higher clock speeds, but still the same thermal problems. Although Intel did add some thermal management that did kind of help mitigate that, but it still was not great. So that's kind of where this was. Now, none of that kind of lays the foundation for how we got here, but it doesn't really explain why this generation of Intel CPUs is so forgotten. Well, it's because it really only had 6 months to be in the limelight. See, with Intel and AMD trading blows with 9000 Intel and Ryzen 3000, Intel has released Comet Lake in order to kind of take back the gaming performance. And they did. This offered between 5 and 10% performance benefit over Ryzen 3000. So the general consensus was, hey, if you're still stuck on a quad core, go ahead and upgrade to Comet Lake. But if you're on a Coffee Lake 8th gen or 9th gen chip, not worth it at this point. So this was just kind of a blip on the radar. This was a release for Intel to take back the performance crown from AMD and to be back on top again. And it was kind of their last real gasp of air, because this was May of 2020. In November of 2020, AMD would then release their Ryzen 5000 chips. And if you're an AMD fanboy, you remember that this is a big, momentous occasion in AMD's history. Because in November, they would release Ryzen 5000, which brought with it the Zen 3 architecture, which was such a huge performance uplift from Zen 2 back in Ryzen 3000. And Intel at that point had a very hard time catching up. Even the successor to this, the 11th gen, had a hard time competing with Ryzen 5000. If you were an AMD fanboy back then, you remember how awesome it was to see AMD finally take the crown back from Intel and stay on top. Intel really didn't have an answer with the 11th gen. The 11th gen is arguably more forgettable than this, but that's for a different video. And then eventually the next year in 2021, Intel would come out with Alder Lake with their new hybrid architecture of performance and efficiency cores. AMD would transition from their AM4 socket to an LGA-based socket with the Ryzen 7000, and the rest is history. But that's not why we're here today. That gives you the history as to why we got here and a little bit of background for what this generation was. And this particular chip today is the i5-10400F. This was the budget CPU king of its time. You didn't get quite as much clock speed as you would with the 10600K, and also being an F variant, it doesn't have an included graphics chip in it, so you can't actually plug a display into your motherboard to take advantage of any graphics. It also doesn't have quick sync functionality without a graphics chip in it. But you got 6 Comet Lake cores, 12 threads at a decent price. So that's good. And then I was able to pick this up on the secondhand market, complete in box, for 80 bucks today. So that's where we're at. And my goal with this video is to show that while this was a pretty forgettable generation, the performance wasn't bad, and that we can still game on it today. So with that in mind, let's start going over our parts. So I have the whole motherboard already assembled. There's a story here. So this motherboard, CPU is already installed with the included box cooler. The motherboard is an MSI Z490 Pro A. This would have been a kind of a mid-range ATX board, giving you all the features that you would need in 2020. Very adequate. I got this for, I believe, $40. And you might be thinking, that's really cheap for a Z series chipset motherboard from only 5 years ago. And you'd be right. I got it for such a deal because it had bent pins in the socket. Now, using some very fine tweezers and a microscope, I was able to push the pins back into place, put the CPU in, and I did get it to post, which is awesome. So I got a deal on this, which makes me feel very, very good. So that is nice. So that is going to be our kind of main platform. With this motherboard, we should be in good shape. 2 PCI Express slots, our 16X PCIe slot, our NVMe slots for SSDs, PCI Express 16X, and then this one, which is an 8X slot electrically, and then 3 1X slots as well. Pretty standard features. You got USB-C, USB 3.0 headers right here. We got our I/O, not that expansive. We have 4 USB-A ports, Ethernet port. I'm almost positive that's just gigabit, but I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure it's gigabit. PS2, that's something. And then HDMI and display port that we can't use, and USB-C on the back, that's nice. So there you go. That is going to be our motherboard for this video. As for RAM, I just went with whatever I had. It's really not going to matter too much for this CPU. But this is T-Force. This is like some RGB T-Force RAM that I just had kicking around, not doing anything. And it is, give me a moment. Oh, crap. I think it's 32 or 3000. Either 3200 or 3000 megahertz. So there you go. It's perfectly fine, and it's 16 gigs of RAM, and that's what we need. So there you go. That is going to be our base platform for this PC. Now, if you were around in 2020, you might remember about this thing called COVID that happened. It was a whole thing. You can read about it on Wikipedia. And with it came a GPU shortage. Well, it's the year 2025, and let's just say GPU availability has not gotten any better. So I literally just went with what I had available, and that is this. This is a GTX 1070. I know that this thing is pushing like 9 years old at this point, but honestly, I think for what I'm going to be using it for, this should be perfectly fine. I'm not worried about it at all, because this particular experiment is going to be, we don't need the most GPU power at all. Plus, you know, this was released in 2016 with a 2020 CPU. I'm not too worried about it. In fact, you know, with the GPU shortage back then, NVIDIA's RTX 3000 series was so hard to come by. I remember these things were going for like $600 or $700 on eBay at the time. These were very, very hard to find because the GPUs, you just couldn't get them. They were nowhere to be found. So yeah, it actually wouldn't be, if you had a 10400F and a 1070, that actually would not be like an unheard of configuration in 2020 with all the part shortages going on. So it's actually, on accident, a very period correct configuration. Power supply is going to be this EBGA Supernova 650 watt gold. This is probably overkill for this particular build. Realistically, probably more like a 500 or a 550 bronze is what I would shoot for. But honestly, I didn't want to buy a new power supply just for this video, and this one was out of the box and has all the cables ready to go. So it's just what I went with. For this evening, our case is going to be the same Rosewell case that I was building in for the Scrapyard PC. And you can see I've already started to deconstruct it. So yeah, the case is perfectly functional, and it will protect all of our components. So that's what matters. Let's start building this thing. Okay, well, damn it. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Ugh, Asus, why did you have to make the card so big? That ain't gonna work. Alright, well, I did not consider that, so I guess back to the drawing board. Alright, well, we have a post. So here's where we're at. I had two GTX 1070s. Both of them were too big to fit into this case. There's simply not enough clearance. This graphics card does fit. This is an RX 580, so it's not the best GPU to pair with this CPU, unfortunately. But you know what? We're going to roll with it. I'm still going to be able to use this for the video. We also have an issue with the motherboard. So what you'll notice here is you have, I believe this is A1, A2, B1, B2, okay? Both of the A slots, if I have RAM in there, they will not post. both of the B slots are fine. And you can see I have my 16 gigs of DDR4. It is detected. See that right there? 16 gigs. The problem is that I lost dual channel support, and I'm gonna have to rely on running in single channel. In the real world, this isn't going to be a huge deal, but it is something to kind of be aware of. I think the issue is I fixed those bent pins in the CPU socket, and I guess I didn't fix them good enough. So I got one channel of memory working, but sadly not the second one. So I do have my 16 gigs, but we are limited to single channel. Unfortunate. But hey, the CPU was 80 bucks, the motherboard was 30. These other components I bought a long time ago, so all in, I'm all in on this system for like $110. I am not that mad about it. I need to put in a new fan here because this one apparently is dead. And then after that, we should be good to go. All right, so there you have it. Our final PC. So like I said, had to go with the RX 580, 8 gig. Maybe I'll swap it out when I get the chance, but for now that's what I gotta go with. So that's not really the focus. The focus is what I was able to achieve here for $110. An i5 10400F and a $30 motherboard that I partially fixed. One of the memory channels I couldn't fix with the bent pins. Maybe I'll, someday I will take out the CPU and try to properly fix it so I can use both memory channels. But for now, we're gonna be going with 16 gigs and just the one channel. But you know, for 30 bucks, I'm not angry at it. So that is kind of where we're at right now. That's an overview of the CPU, and that is kind of where I'm at with the PC. Got to get the side panel and the front panel on here. Shantae is my waifu. But I got to get all that stuff put back on. Got to get the final thing assembled. And you might be asking yourself, well, we went through the trouble of building it. What are we going to be using this PC for? Well, I told you that this is a really good budget gaming CPU in the year 2025, right? So, I figure it's a great budget CPU. Let's play some budget games. That's all I'm gonna say. I will see you guys next video where we put this thing to the test and put it through its paces, tackling some games in 2025. I think you're going to enjoy it a lot. Stay tuned. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. We will see you next time.